have a number of questions, but I think since we want to wrap up around 7:45 and we have about half an hour left. Oh, around 8. Okay. Maybe I'll just start with one question. Just the pragmatic question about either resources that you go to that have been really important for you, how the economies run in your space, and that means that if it's self-funded, why you chose to keep it self-funded and how that affects your projects, just so that people can get a little sense of the behind the scenes of how these things have been able to keep running. Because actually, it's interesting, all of you guys it's not all self-funded per se, but none of you get paid for this work. So I think it's important that people hear what is the reason that you want to keep it going without getting paid, or do you want, what you're working towards. So a little behind the scenes look from everybody. Who wants to start?
I can start just because I'm in talking mode. I was wondering about this panel, right? Because I feel like maybe artist-run spaces just mean you don't get paid, but that's not always the case, of course. But right, we're artists and we want to do it for ourselves and our community, right? Like we are in this position that we're trying to support. So that's part of, I guess, why. But the funding structure is pretty straightforward. We're just recently a 501c3, but we have never really gotten much in the way of grants and stuff. That's maybe 5% of what we get. Fundraising accounts for more like 30% of what we get, maybe 30 to 40% this last year, and then the rest is residency tuition and often whatever we as staff and board can just chip in. We started doing residencies about 8 years ago with Herald Arts, and this residency is about 3 years old, and it's strange but great that for the first time this last year, not a significant portion of our extra spending cash has gone towards paying the residency, but yeah, it's a long way from anyone getting paid, and we don't know if we want to, and no. So.
Yeah, but so
too quick?
No, it's a little quick. But do you? So then the way that the organization works, I know this. I'm just gonna say it. There's about 20, 25 people that are staff members there that are all artists, and it's all volunteer run. And at the same time, you guys are building a board, and you're building fundraising activities, and the residency fees go back into the residency. So for that, that kind of program that you're building. Do you want it to turn into, like a Skowhegan-like situation, or, is there another organizational model that you guys keep in mind?
It's like the income and outcome, I guess, are two different things. In terms of a lot of things about Skowhegan, they're nice, but we want to serve a different community of artists that are more like us, that can't spend thousands of dollars and take off our entire summers. And so in terms of who can come, we want to maintain that sort of level of things. In terms of how institutional, if that's the right word, we get, I guess, we are determining that this year. We have a vision quest or several planned to try to do some strategic planning this year, which also sounds really weird and new to us because we're just not going to go with every idea we have right away. We're actually going to take some time to think about if we want to think about different spaces in Chicago, or maybe securing some interest in the farm. We would love, yes, some stability, and the only reason I want to get paid is so that I can spend more time not on my day jobs, right? And so I think that's sort of the sentiment in general. We want to keep working on this and work on it more because we like it a lot, and I think it's doing well, I hope. So. Those are the reasons that we want structure. Building a board and fundraising and trying to reach out to donors isn't fun at all, but we hope that some percentage of that not fun time will make us have more time with the artists that we like to work with. Yeah.
Wow. So the Suburban is run out of the economy of our household. Right? Always has been, and it will always, because it is tethered to the house and to the studio and so forth. The Poor Farm, again, we pay the mortgage on the Poor Farm. We're really adamant about not asking artists for money. We're really adamant about not doing auctions, not asking for artwork. We will not do that. We do not ask money when people come and stay for a week on end. We just won't do that. And we don't have to, and we're in a privileged position to do that. My husband and I both have full-time teaching jobs, and we're really thankful to have those jobs, and we're giving back that way, and it gives back to us in all kinds of ways. Mm-hmm.
I would like to have a job. I'd like to be paid, actually, myself. But I was a teaching artist for a while, so at the Hyde Park Art Center, and I am not doing that because I don't have time to do that with this kind of work, and it's really difficult. So I personally would like to somehow find a way to make our project at least be able to pay one or two people. Yeah, how did we rented some studio spaces up on the top floor, and that's how we paid our $1,500 a month. We did a Kickstarter, which we didn't succeed at this year. We had a few benefit parties with lots of bands that played for us and charged an entrance fee. And yeah, I mean, we've written for grants that we haven't gotten. That sounds very depressing, sorry. I'm gonna just pass that down to the Clutch Gallery.
Well, my space costs about $5 to run, with approximately $25 in materials a year. So we are not like, there weren't openings. I never had to buy beer for anyone. All of the things that go along with kind of running a space, even the size of the Suburban, a larger space, something that has feet instead of inches. I didn't have to worry about, and this was really an extension of my performative practice, and my aim is to be an artist and not necessarily a curator, and this was a way for me to do some R&D on my own practice. So I would never, ever consider trying to ask for money when I'm trying to do R&D for my own practice. And all these artists really came along and helped me in a lot of ways, and their artwork that I respond to and could talk about and could learn something new from that. So in that way, my model, I think, is kind of the inverse of a lot of the other models here, because I'm trying to make money elsewhere. I don't make a lot of money in the art practice, but that in other ways.
Are there, like, for the people that are, sorry. For the people, I would like to say I don't think that there's like a value being placed on whether or not you're able to pay yourself or not. I just think that it is really interesting that that the conditions are very different, and that you're articulating sort of different value that's being added to your life beyond, being able to pay yourself, but that it is really difficult to figure out how to create sustainable economic models for these kinds of work. So maybe, I don't know if there's, like, before we just jump into questions, if there's like particular resources that people go to that feel like that it's, or maybe resources that they would like that they could share with other people that are interested in starting spaces that might be helpful. I don't know. Do you guys have anything in that regard?
I want those resources.
Okay. Maybe we can go to questions. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, we are the recipient. We applied for a Warhol grant and we got it. So we have 2 years of programming. We got a substantial amount of money for programming, which actually always costs us very little. I mean, we need things like the bricks and mortar support. But I think it's important to know, and maybe this responds to not getting grants. When you think about Warhol, when you think about the NEA, Chicago is considered a culturally overbuilt city, right? There's a lot of resources here. There's the big institutions, right? So Warhol sees this place. They see Kansas City. They see northeastern Wisconsin. That's what they're going to want to support. So the arts resource where you can get that support money from, they're looking for a lot of bang for their buck. They're going to look for developing a cultural community, which there is none in northeastern Wisconsin, right? So it's futile for me to think about, reaching out or thinking about the Suburban as, trying to tap into some of that money, because we're built here. It's quite amazing, and there's also people in the audience who run spaces. So, alternative funding sources are really important, or other kinds of resources, right? So.
Originally, we had wanted to provide services for the community that we just didn't have. So we started the wood shop, and we wanted to have a recording studio there, and we knew that our community did want and need some of these things. But without the funding, we really had a hard time setting up the wood shop, and so it's kind of it's a difficult conundrum to be in, but. Yeah, I guess providing real services to people and asking them to be members of something where they really did receive a lot was what we're still striving for.
In addition to your question, could any of you who have your own spaces in the audience raise your hand? And could you take a moment to quickly just tell us what space you're running?
I'm running Portage Art Space in Portage Park. The bike room in East Rogers Park. Terrain in Oak Park.
The Salon Series, which travels around.
The IAEOU in Westtown.
Same. The Lawn Gallery in Logan Square.
So I know you had a question.
Actually, they addressed it.
Oh, they did?
I have a question, actually. We actually started our makerspace, the IAEOU in Westtown, because we wanted to build a creative community, and it seems like there's so many other people here who are interested in doing that. The phone book that you addressed, is that how we can all get together and share ideas? I mean, is that a good place to start?
I mean, it's one forum. I mean, one of the ways that the reason that we decided to expand beyond artist-run spaces for this particular year is because we saw a whole bunch of different kinds of artist-run community building projects happen, and so that was the idea to invite residencies and event series, and thinking about community resources, other projects in the Sunday Soup Grant, things basically just, trying to highlight the under the radar sort of thing that is happening that is really prevalent, and just tends to be that people don't know what's going on in other cities that are like-minded to them. So it's one way, and this is something that we're going to keep going with, but I think that there's all sorts of different forums that people can get together and try and make visible their network so that you can figure out what kinds of things that you need to share in order to get your own programming done.
So if one was wanting to create some type of exhibition space, if it was via a residency or kind of a private home situation, what would you individually avoid based on some of the bad things that you've done? The things like just don't do it, it seems like a great idea, or the obvious thing that, don't do that.
When we were starting our exhibition series, Abby told us not to do every Sunday, having done soup every Sunday. Well, he cautioned us about it.
Yeah.
And it was exhausting.
So the thing that happened with soup, the reason that I said that is because when you do a project like that, it tends to be that people are like, oh, yeah, good idea, I'll come next week. And then they don't really ever end up making the trip. And so what we came to understand is that it was a super, and it's easy to talk about soup because it became this really successful thing, but it was really floundered for about a year and a half because we didn't really understand the conditions under which other people would want to enter the space. And so the reason that we formalized and did this once a month thing and said, okay, the meal happens at noon and the presentation happens at 1 and you pay this amount, is so that people didn't feel weird like walking into a space with 5 people sitting in it that all obviously knew each other, that we had to figure out our public presence and we had to figure out why someone else would feel comfortable, because it's not, if you are interested, and not everybody is interested in reaching out to communities that are not your own, that you don't already know, you have to figure out what's going to get them in the door. And so for us, that was the way that worked, was to say, okay, like we're going to plan in advance, we're going to make it public, we're going to say it happens now, and that this is, and we're going to make the meal, what the menu is. So for us, that kind of, just sort of understanding what hospitality was really transformed the project and made other people feel like that they could take it as an invitation to do it in their own context. And so I think that was the need that was, kind of, we were floundering a little bit because we just sort of imagined that, yeah, this is a great idea, everybody's going to want to do this, but, we actually had to reach other people that we didn't already know, that we couldn't just say, hey, this is a great idea, you should show up. So. But
Yeah.
it worked for you guys.
It sort of did. Well, I was going to say that, I don't know, on Sunday we had our first show that wasn't that model, and immediately, somehow, it was like magic, totally different publics came. Like, the install time was longer, so the artists were sort of outside hanging out for several weeks, and they met neighbors and the neighbors' kids, and those people were finally in the space. We tried so many other things to do that, and it was just like, don't have stuff all the time with 5 people who know each other.
Well, yeah,
sitting
I mean,
there.
that's the other reason that I caution you against is because one of the things that we ran into is the question of burnout, which I think a lot of people have to deal with. You know, if it is your job or if it isn't your job, you know, that like we tend to pour our entire identities into our creative projects, and that gives us meaning in our life, but it also tends to be really taxing. And so what I was worried about with these guys is, you know, they work so tirelessly on producing all these programs for Chicago artists all over the place, and that if it's just this constant, if you add one more thing in there, then it's just going to have a meltdown. So, and then, you know, and that's not what happened. I mean, you guys, you know, sort of started to work with other partner galleries and started to spread the labor around. But I would say, you know, the idea of burnout is something that is like really important, that we need to figure out how to do some self-care, you know, if you're pursuing projects like this, so that you're not always just working in service of others, but you're trying to understand what you're getting out of it and have some balance there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about understanding the constraints you're putting on yourself. You know, when I thought about, you know, narrowing my life down to essentially 3 personal objects that I could carry anywhere I go, I didn't really understand how frustrating that would get 2 years later. I mean, I should have, because that sounds really frustrating when I say it now. But the actual act of doing that, I started kind of to resent myself. Not the artists that were in this space, but myself for giving myself such a constraint. So kind of knowing when to reassess. And also, like, when I was initially thinking of closing the gallery, people were like, no, don't close it. We really like it. I'm like, but you don't have to carry this stuff. You know, like, to understand, you know, where your line ends and the community line begins. And conversely, understand when someone who's not familiar with the art in your space or your space gets to lead the conversation about your space. I mean, I think that was the thing that I understood a lot more at the end of 2 years, was knowing when to shut up about the art that was in my space and let, like, the person that may or may never have anything to do with my space again talk, and listen to what they have to say and kind of understand how those things are viewed. That was really valuable for me. And I'd like to think conversely it was valuable for them, but I might never know.
I had one really quick thing to say about that, about what you learned, right, from making mistakes, is I can't believe how much time it takes to actually advertise things so that people know what's going on. And if you don't take that time, you can really have some terrible things happen. I threw a time bank party, and it was just me and the DJ, for example. I thought it was going to be a great party.
I don't have the time to come.
No.
Yeah, no.
And for anyone who's running a space or is thinking of running a space, there are 2 books that you should read. One is the Artist Run Spaces catalog that was put out by the MCA a spell ago. They just put a whole bunch more on sale. They had like 3 cases in the back, and they just put a whole bunch more on sale at the MCA bookstore recently. And it literally, I think it starts in the 1900s and goes up through 1980 of Artist Run Spaces in Chicago. And then the second one was actually put out by Three Walls in conjunction with Green Lantern Press, in conjunction with the Hyde Park Art Center show on Artist Run Spaces. That was put out in 2009. And those two together are kind of a nice, oh yeah, Tempest has the Three Walls one in her hand. I think it's just called Artist Run Spaces.
It's called
right?
Artist Run Chicago.
Artist Run Chicago. That's a good way to kind of know the history, because these histories really fall apart really, really quickly. Things are open for like, a year, and then they disappear, and someone moves to New York, and it's done, and someone goes, oh, I remember that thing that did that. So, I mean, those two catalogs together kind of have like really nice views on the way people have thought about artist-run space, domestic space, public space, and doing projects. Just as a random recommendation on the way out.
The Gretchen Bender is a dead artist. So I have a range of artists that I work with, from Luc Toymans. You all know Luc Toymans, the painter. He has shown out at the Suburban, as Kelly Poe, who I'm sure none of you know. So we have a range. We show a range of artists at the Suburban. We have consistently. The Port Farm, I think, is it's more strategic than that. So we have, the way the exhibitions are played out, we have a focused exhibition. In this case, it's the Gretchen Bender exhibition I was telling you about, that is going to have its little travel to the continent and so forth through New York. But also we create opportunities for younger artists to try things out, whether it's in the exhibitions, whether it's outside, or whether it's in some of the other exhibition spaces in the building. So we understand that it's really important to kind of have these kind of these two kind of frames going on at any given time. Where we can kind of dedicate a catalog and a lot of research, but then also have these kind of orbiting projects that go on. So that's really important, because nobody else would come up to. And again, I mean, when we think about Wisconsin, northeastern Wisconsin, nobody would come up to see it, right? I mean, people are going to see the Gretchen Bender show when it's in New York and not in Wapaka County. But I also think it's just kind of to open that up a little bit. Our audience is very different, right? I do not care about the community. I welcome them in, but I am not interested in creating programming to my neighborhood in Oak Park. That is not my interest at all. That doesn't mean the neighbors don't come and knock and want to know what's going on, and I'm more than happy to tell them. But I do not create programming for the rural community in Wisconsin or to the Oak Park community. So that's very different. I see my community as those who are going to be interested in the Gretchen Bender show. Kunsthalle Bern, it's Switzerland, it's London, it's New York. So I think I'm a little bit different than my friends up here.
I have a question. And this goes to some of the people who have spaces in the audience as well. How did you learn how to do this? What did you turn to? Who did you turn to? When did you decide to start your spaces, and what models did you follow? And anybody can start. Or someone, Sabina, anyone in the audience who has, not to call you out, I'm sorry, but anyone in the audience who might have something to add to that as well.
So I'm with IAEOU, which is an extension of the Institute for Arts Entrepreneurship. And the space actually just got launched this past August, and the motivation and the model for it is based on an idea of, for our students who are in the Entrepreneurship and Arts program, which is focusing on not just the visual and media arts, but also in the text and sciences, that they have a space that is their professional development, where they can do an extension of the business side, as well as having events and showings and theater and gallery viewings, be able to meet clients, be able to create it as an incubator and a think tank. And so for us, our model has been really about engaging the community, about bringing people into a space, about building a membership. We also want to see it as, we hope that IAOU's growth will allow us to then do scholarships and grants for the students who are in the actual program of IAE, so that we can then continue to provide an entrepreneurial background to the very people engaged in the very work of doing art collaboratively, doing design, doing tech, sciences. So that's kind of a bit where we're at right now and where we're trying to head and grow ourselves. Our founder is Lisa Canning, who's been a serial entrepreneur, heavily involved in the arts on different levels, and she launched Institute for Arts Entrepreneurship about 2 years ago. And she kind of came to us as a natural extension of, you're not going to offer an educational program to help creative individuals and empower them to go into the business world with their creative empowerment, whether it's running a business. We have gamers, we have artists, we have photographers, we have videographers. I'm a consultant, different kinds of levels of creativity, life coaching consultant, without empowering them to give them then the space to actually grow and develop that very entrepreneurship. And so that was where the model actually ended up coming out of, is that we wanted to give creative people a place where they could then experiment, develop the skills, execute the skills, and grow and launch themselves successfully by having a physical space to do that in, not just run them through some educational program.
So I came to Chicago in the mid-'90s to go to the Art Institute, and I think the year I came, Name Gallery had closed the year before. Randolph Street Gallery closed 2 years into me with my undergrad. And those were kind of some of the last two kind of artist-run spaces, although ARC still exists, but their model has changed, and Artemisia's model was changing at that time. And that kind of ended a really long run of the defunding of spaces by the NEA, and kind of these other spaces in Chicago. So to fill the void, Better Weimar-Reiner Gallery opened, Bodybuilder and Sportsman, Dogmatic, NFA Space. These kind of smaller galleries that some chose to go professional, some closed. I mean, I think Suburban opened at that time as well. And that's what I cut my teeth on. Like, those were the openings that I was going to. I mean, I was going to River North because the West Loop didn't really exist quite yet. And those were the spaces that I was seeing. A lot of them were run as project spaces. And that's the kind of work I really respond to, making ephemeral work that is not always as cash and carry as it could be. So having cut my teeth on kind of those spaces and coming back to Chicago, that's the model that I work off of. And I actually married the man who ran Dogmatic, so what it meant to like put a project space in my purse. And oddly enough, my purse sold work and was collected by a museum. So it actually functioned as a gallery in ways I didn't think that it would, but they're really based on these spaces that were these interstitial spaces between kind of the era of these not-for-profits closing and like Three Bowls opening and some kind of other things that were happening. Yeah, I have a blog and a Facebook page, and really it was by word of mouth, because it was really about my interaction. Like, okay, the person who sells me coffee really likes my purse. They can check it out on Facebook and follow me, and I'll open my purse up and tell them those things. It was actually less for this community and more for the people I have more interaction with on a daily basis. Less for that, but at the same time, I wasn't, as Michelle says, I wasn't programming for like what I think people would like. I think I only had 2 painting shows. It's a different kind of project in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way that the word community and the whole thing kind of gets a bad rap in general in the arts, but I think that from my perspective, I came here, I left America in the 80s and was in Europe for 13 years. So when I came back, I had to get to know what was going on in America. I had been maybe reading about it in books, but I really didn't know Chicago, and I didn't know what was going on, so I didn't know any of these projects. And this was a way also to reach out, not to the neighborhood necessarily only, but also the broader community, to figure out what people are doing and to get in contact with each other. I wanted to say that we, for example, we showed one of the older members of our community made these beautiful radios for a really long time, and he had about 100 of them in his apartment, and he showed his radios. They're now to be seen at the Intuit Museum. But again, it wasn't so much to please the community, but rather to create some element of surprise in the community in which I lived, in which I had to walk down the streets that I had to walk down myself. And it was very much also about connections, but there's a very strong interest, of course, in our projects in contemporary art and artists and promoting art, and being an artist as well. And a lot of, you have to, as an artist, you also have to be engaged in your work as an art practice, otherwise it becomes only some kind of, not only, but it becomes something else, and it's not an art project anymore. So I think it's a precarious kind of place to perch yourself on, the community and the art world, and it's an interesting place to be, but you have to really keep the balance and stay where you are inspired and where you need to be as a working artist as well.
I'm just jumping in because I got the microphone. But no, I was just thinking, it's like this is one of these things where I had started what we called at the time an alternative space in San Francisco in 1978 in an abandoned building on Market Street, because myself and 3 other people were really pissed off at the other spaces, which were really snotty, and well, they weren't snotty. It was a conceptual work. It was these places called La Mamelle and New Langton Arts, and we were roving punks. So we felt that we could do it better. And so that dissatisfaction and rage element and kind of generational fury was really important to establishing that space, which crashed and burned, of course, due to a lot of other factors, after. But the second time I ended up running some things were in a different way attached to education, because in Los Angeles in the 90s where I lived, I would go and find abandoned or empty storefronts in malls and have students from different places do work there. So that was like attaching to a different kind of institution. And actually, it's interesting, this place in Oak Park is my house, and it's completely to have fun with other artists here, because I moved here. And so the audience is artists, because I remember thinking that artists don't, it's like, why are people always targeting art at people other than artists? We're our best audience, ridiculous. Why not? And there's an interesting interface that happens accidentally. I think that's kind of fun for the people who do projects there, but it's a completely private sort of enterprise in a way, and that's a really different kind of thing. So it's been interesting to go through these 3 different models and 3 different ways of doing these kinds of projects, but one thing I don't think is I don't see it as an extension of my own work at all. It's not my piece. Doing that is not my work. It's a hospitality fun thing to have parties and to do things for other artists. But, and there are artists that do really see it as their own work, and that's a whole different kind of practice. So that's how
Well, I was just going to say, I pretty much started my space because I moved to Portage Park, and it seems like a really not an art community at all, and I kind of wanted to bring the art there, or put the neighborhood on the map, so to speak. So kind of represent the Northwest side. So, but I was identifying it a little bit like Meg, as a kind of an extension of my practice. Even though I'm a painter, I thought it was like a social practice experiment. So it still continues to be kind of a learning process for me, where I started it with a solo show, just showing a friend's work, and then inviting curators, and then doing even performances, collaborating with my parents. I did a project that involved serving food to the community. It was based on my culture, like that, stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know. I was just it's sort of it's just kind of like it continues to morph, and I don't know really where it's going necessarily, but it's been an interesting, experiment.
Hi, I took a couple notes here. Kind of going back and riffing on what Meg was saying, your gallery space ended up selling work and being collected and guest curated and morphed into something more than you were expecting it to become. And I think that happens a lot of times with different ideas that as arts administrators we may have, but then also, realize that we can go into different directions with our ideas. At what point or what flags were raised, and actually what kind of mechanisms were involved in deciding to either augment your idea into a physical space, or possibly go nonprofit with your idea, or not go nonprofit, or what happens a lot of times is what we were talking about too, is kind of burnout, fatigue, and closing up shop. So whoever wants to speak to that.
Yeah, listening to Sabina talk a little bit about kind of these various manifestations of these spaces, and I'm thinking about, now Sabina has this lovely little bungalow in Oak Park, and the lawn is there, right? And it's the same thing with the Poor Farm, particularly. Again, we're middle-aged, we got some resources, we buy a place in Wisconsin. Like, you keep these things close, right? I mean, it's all within reach, right? When you start to overreach your maybe developmental location, your bank account, you're screwed, right? So you have to keep these things, and you have to know and reflect on them all the time, and they will grow, as Sabina beautifully mapped out in these kind of three, again, manifestations of these spaces. So, that's, that I do a lot of things. I do not wrap my identity up in running the Suburban or the Poor Farm. I really do a lot of things. So, and again, so I don't have an ego involvement in these in these spaces as well, and I think that gives me some distance. It allows some clarity in terms of and bringing the kind of artist frame to it. What is interesting right now? I'm able to kind of see those things, not as a curator, not as a critic, not as a teacher. So again, to kind of to think about not only a combination of things, diversifying, but also kind of knowing what your resources are, knowing who you are at any given time. And if you work against those things, it's not going to work.
Did you ever find any conflicts that came up for you, Meg, in the running of the space, and when it felt like it crossed over a line for you, or?
The last 3 months were really tough for me. I don't know what shifted in the last 3 months, but that was when and it's funny because I literally had basically a boulder in my purse, and it didn't feel like I was carrying a boulder around. Yet the last 3 months, man, I just did not want to carry the thing around anymore. And I think part of it was I had hit the kinds of interactions that I was interested in, and I don't want to be a curator. Like, I'm not built for it, and nor do I have an art history degree. But that was just whatever mental, and I'm not actually sure what it was, but whatever mental switch kind of got hit, it was no longer fun to carry it around, and it might be that I really wanted to carry my lunch and my keys in one place. And of course, the month after I got rid of it, I kept losing my keys in my bag because my bag was so big. So I had to adjust back to regular life.
I don't know how to talk about this tactfully or something, but I don't know if I agree that it's not always it's always bad to take on more than you can chew, or to feel overwhelmed by something. As we've gotten some problems solved and begun to run more smoothly, I find myself getting really bored, and I want more to deal with, right? When a problem comes up, I'm super excited. And when the residency is happening and there's a strange new emergency problem, that's like, you get the adrenaline, and it's sort of an addiction, and like, yeah, your like body suffers, and maybe your brain over time, but I'm not getting other reward systems, so I've like trained myself to get that one, and so.
But I think it has to do, though, a little bit with the idea that, like, for you, and I was going to ask Laura about this, too, is, like, the organizing practice is your creative practice, and that feeling like it sounds like the way Michelle's talking about it, it's like she's got these many different moving parts to having a full art life and a regular life. And so that, but, when and Meg is, that this project is very much a discrete art practice that sort of tests the limits and, the possibilities of her performative subject. And then for you guys, it seems like it's really about, this, like an organizing practice as a continuing creative project in your lives. So I guess, I don't know if you feel like that.
Yeah, I guess it's like a consolation for not getting to draw or something, right? Getting to solve those problems instead of the other ones. But yeah, I mean, totally, there's total burnout, and that's a total, like, different, like, sorry, I'm trying to say something along the lines of Harold Arts and Acre sort of diverged along sort of casual versus workaholic paths, right? And so maybe that's yeah. That contributed to it, as well as the new farm and everything. And so it's certainly not for everyone at all, and some people like start getting really involved with us and excited, and then we're like, well, take some crack this work, and they don't want to do it as much as we do. I don't know. I'm going, I've never thought about it this way before, so these are half-baked, obviously, ideas. But we like it, I don't know, in a sick way, it sounds like.
I think, oh.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody here wanted to volunteer, you would place them within a certain arena that they would work with other people to do these things.
Absolutely, yeah. Come and help. There's like 50 committees and 50 different staff roles, and yeah, it's fun. And right, there is a turnover, and that's fun. Like, I think that some people like to just come and get a taste of it or something, and then they have their own professional making practices sort of take over, and maybe they can't spend as much time on it or something, but we have 80 new artists coming every year, and for the most part, that's who either helps grow or regenerate the population of volunteers, yeah.
I was just going to comment on the kind of excitement of finding strategies for dealing with problems. Like we just recently had the strike, and we all went through that, and I started a kind of solidarity camp with a bunch of other interested and willing parents in the neighborhood, and we did public art with kids in the park, and we just spent the entire time in the park. We had to find public restrooms, and people dropped off water to us. It was really exciting and really wonderful, and it was very draining and difficult, and taking care of 30 kids, it really taught me a lot about how to, value the teachers and how hard their work is. But we made public art in the park, and what I realized at that point was that I really enjoy doing public projects and coming up and kind of dealing with crisis in some ways. So it makes you very creative when you have to deal with crisis.
So we're coming to the end of the discussion, and we have one last question.
I had a question for Nick, talking about volunteers and stability and that kind of thing. I believe Oxbow does like a work study kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that, or are you considering having that?
Yeah, we do have that too, yeah. Oxbow, we look at a lot, and we do some things differently and some things the same. But yeah, work study is pretty standard, and we always want to find ways to give our residents ways to pay less, and that's, to get further into it would be kind of complicated, but it's based on their score and what their willingness, their need, and all these things. But yeah, they wash dishes, whereas, we washed the dishes for 7 years, and we were like, work studies can do this, and from what we've heard, it's way less work than most other residencies, which relieves us when we feel like empathetic pain watching people wash dishes for 2 hours. which not all the way. I still feel that pain. I don't know. But yeah, what were the other question?
Yeah.
That was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you know,
I haven't
that, yes,
stopped.
there are scholarship opportunities
Yeah.
at the residency, and when you apply, you just indicate that, and it's
Yeah.
based upon scoring, and so, but, you know, you should get in touch with them if you're interested in applying and getting work study, 'cause they do that.
Yep.
And I just want to put in one plug before we end, is that if people are interested in some other conversations about fundraising and different kinds of models for that, for Three Walls, the Hand in Glove conference that we did last year, we did a 2.5-hour long panel about different kinds of models that artist-run spaces across the country are using, and about residency programs, and about different regions, and about, what's the third one? A history of alternative spaces. And so all of those are on our website. If you go to threewalls.org and you go to the Hand in Glove component, there's videos. So that is of interest for people.
And then also the phone book 3 is available back here if you're interested in purchasing it, as well as the Artist Run Chicago Digest. So I want to thank you all for coming out and joining the conversation, and thank you to all of the speakers for giving your insights.